Hey, we're really excited on today's episode to bring to you Ryan Pease. He has almost 2 decades of experience in the military and in leadership, both professionally and personally, and shares his stories and what he's learned along the way in leading others and being led, and the importance of surrounding yourself with good people, good mentors. We're excited for you to tune into today's episode.
Welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization.
Welcome to today's episode of the Everyday Leader Podcast. We're super excited to have Ryan Pease with us. He's a seasoned military leader and got a lot of awesome experience. He's going to bring about leadership and served in some unique positions and done some cool things. And yeah, we're excited to have him. He's a father, a husband, and a leader in both his work and in his church. And yeah, Ryan, welcome. I'm glad to have you on today.
Hey, great to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on, Drew and Tate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess maybe for our listener, maybe just share a little bit about your professional background and what's gotten you to where you're at today.
Yeah, so that's kind of a loaded question, and it's a little bit difficult to kind of articulate depending on the audience, right? So, um, so I've been in the military I'm about to hit 16 years. I'm a captain, so I'm kind of old for a captain. So typically a captain, you're going to hit your captain mark if you commission straight out of college or through one of the other commissioning sources. You'll hit that at about your 4-year mark, depending on what branch of service. But since I'm Air Force, that's the one I can speak to the most. And I will say the opinions shared here do not reflect the opinions of the United States Air Force. These are mine and mine only. But as it relates to the Air Force, typically you're going to hit your captain years at about 4 years. But I had enlisted time before that, which means, and there's kind of this duality within the military, right? So you have kind of the grunts, and I can say that because I was a grunt, and then you have a little more aristocracy when it comes to the officer side. They get paid a little bit more, but their expectations are a lot higher. So specifically as it relates to being a leader in the Air Force. So I've been doing that. So when I first joined in 2009, I was enlisted. I was a generator mechanic basically. So I turned wrenches on generators, big diesel generators, not the little putt generators you might see around, but the big diesel ones. And my first assignment was at F.E. Warren Air Force Base, which is actually a nuke base. So there's ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles in the ground. And we would go out to these remote sites because there was about 150 nuclear missiles in this. I'm not, telling any secrets or anything like that. It's pretty common knowledge. If you look it up, you can Google it. But 150 nuclear sites that F.E. Warren Air Force Base had control over, and so they were out as far as 2.5 hours plus to get out to those sites. And so we would do generator maintenance and stuff like that to keep those systems running. So that was my first base. Did that for about 4 years. Mostly a glorified lube tech. I just change oil on generators, put them back outside, and put them back in commission. Did a little swaptronics, which is basically like fix some electronics here and there, but you're just pulling out cards and replacing them with new cards. And then after that, had supporting one leg of the nuclear triad, right? So there's three. And that one leg was obviously super important, extremely powerful base for the purposes of deterrence operations. And then after that, I had the privilege of getting picked up for a special assignment working under United States Special Operations Command as a support guy. And so I would go follow, Green Berets, SEAL teams and things like that to these weird locations all over the world and just set up camps. And basically it would allow them to kind of shoot, move, and communicate and be able to do their mission, move forward, conduct whatever operation they needed to conduct at a very tactical level, and then return to the camp that we had built. And so we just travel all over and build those camps, and we would integrate with those guys. So we had to have top secret clearance and all that kind of stuff, and you get to do some really cool things. And then the training on top of that, got to go to survival school, get slapped around like I was being interrogated. And, there are things that I can't talk about with that training. You actually sign a non-disclosure agreement. And then I got to do some really awesome shooting schools and things like that. So being embedded with special operations was certainly a highlight of my career. I got recognized so much with the work that I did there that I had the privilege of putting in a package for commissioning, and that's where that's kind of the duality that I was talking about earlier, right? So you can spend an entire career as an enlisted guy, and people certainly do that, and it's a fulfilling career. But for me, I always felt like I had a little bit of a different calling in life. I don't want to say higher calling because they're both equally important within the military structure, but um, so the first 8 years I did enlisted, and then the remainder of that time I've done as a commissioned officer. And with that duty is an expectation that you lead, and you lead from the front. So that's what I've done. My first duty assignment after commissioning was at Lackland Air Force Base, which is it's right there in San Antonio, and it's a joint base. So there's like multiple bases, but it's all one base. Kind of hard to describe, but um, it's like separated by 66 square miles, and so I'd have to commute from one base to another to do certain things. And that's where I got picked up to go lead for just a short time to fill in 328 people. So I was in charge of 328 amazing people there. And then we kind of had to deal with some craziness through three hurricanes. So we had Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston. I don't know if you remember that one. Houston was pretty much decimated, not really decimated, but it was out of commission for quite a while. And we had FEMA come out there, and we kind of orchestrated all of the logistics. And I did forget to mention, so I'm a logistics officer. So kind of like Amazon for the Air Force, except we don't do 2-day shipping. So you can expect your stuff maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 2 months. You just never know when you get it. And so that's what I had the privilege of doing, was work through some of that stuff at Lackland. And then while we were there, COVID hit, and so we had to navigate all of that craziness. And I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio is actually where Air Force basic military training is. That's also where medical training is for the DoD, Department of Defense. And that's actually where pilot training takes place in Joint Base San Antonio. So we have pilot training, medical training, and Air Force basic training. And so lots of these training pipelines were under the threat of being closed with COVID, but we got instruction by the Secretary of Defense that they would have to stay open. And so we had to navigate all these things, and I was a big part of keeping all those pipelines open through the logistics process and making sure that everybody had what they needed, not to mention masks, sanitization equipment, all that kind of stuff. So procuring that and getting it distributed out to the folks that needed it, that was a unique challenge in itself. And then PCS, permanent change of station. That's lingo for just moved. So we relocated uh, from Lackland Air Force Base to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, which is in Alaska. So we made the 14-day drive up to Alaska from San Antonio and Anchorage, and um, had some unique experiences there. So I was in a air mobility squadron, which basically I was loading planes full of rations and things like that to go out to the satellite locations that are keeping an eye on Russia. We have an air identification zone, air defense identification zone, on either side of the United States, and so kind of Alaska is in charge of deterring Russia and keeping an eye on what's going on that side. And so we were keeping our eyes and ears open for any incursions and things like that. And so we had to feed the folks that were out there, and we did that through these really old planes that are still in commission, that we loaded up with food and rations to fly out there. And that was all on contract. So that was a cool experience. And then I stayed at J-Bear is what we call it, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. And I moved from one unit to another, and then I became a supply commander, flight commander is what we call it. And I had about 150 folks under me, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Great leadership lessons came out of that. Um, Lots of unique experiences, mostly with sustaining the aircraft that were there. There's about 54 F-22 fighter jets that are there. And then we have AWACS, which are your airborne warning and control systems. They're the ones that if you fly into battle, right, they have these big radar domes on them. It's a Boeing 707. They don't fly those anymore. I think only Iran flies those nowadays, and they only use them as passenger planes. So finding parts to keep those things in the air is extremely difficult. But we have parts circulating within the Air Force that we're able to reuse and fix and put back on the plane. But again, it's just a huge constraint, and leading through that and working through those challenges is unique. And so those AWACS, airborne warning and control systems, exist to maintain battle space. So if you're flying jets into a fight, these things are flying at a higher altitude, and they're able to use that radar to keep track of enemy forces on the ground and in the air and all that kind of stuff. And so they can kind of keep track of that kind of stuff. And then we had a few like C-17s and C-5s, which are cargo planes that we helped. And then I moved from there. So we were there for about 3 years, and now we moved to Scott Air Force Base, smack dab in the middle of the United States, near St. Louis. Um, and really, what I do here is just fly a desk. I just sit at a desk all day, and crunch numbers. But I'm the director of operations for uh, one of the squadrons here. It's a supply chain squadron, and we just provide supply chain support across the Air Force enterprise. So I can go deep on that, but I don't think your listeners would care to hear what I have to say about the supply chain operations side of things, because we're here to talk about leadership. But that's in a I say a nutshell. I kind of said a lot, but that's been my career up to this point.
Well, two things, Ryan. One, I'm glad you let us know you're not going to say anything you can't say. I was like getting worried that maybe I'd look out my window and see a drone pointing at me, but so it sounds like we're safe there. And
That's
two,
right.
one thing you said very briefly earlier that maybe we can unpack a little bit. You made a comment that how'd you say it? You said something about your role and where you're at now isn't bigger or greater than
Oh,
anyone
yes. So
else's.
the enlisted side versus the officer side, right? So the
Yeah.
roles, I can't say one is greater than the other. My calling isn't higher in this point in
Yeah.
my life than it was before.
Well, one thing we sometimes talk about on our podcast is that like leadership's a choice, and it's not necessarily leadership isn't necessarily, hey, you have a title that makes you a leader. It's you can be a leader in whatever role you're in. I don't know. So maybe you can speak to that, or maybe share a lesson or two about leadership you've learned through this
Yeah,
journey.
absolutely. And I think there are tenets of leadership and followership, right? Because as you learn from others, you can take and apply to your own life. And so I think, and it's funny that we talk about that in the Air Force too, as you go through some of the leadership training. Being a good follower is critical to knowing and understanding what it takes to be a good leader. Um, and that's really one of the things that helped me get to where I am today, right? Because no matter where you're at within the Department of Defense structure, it is a hierarchy, and you're going to be leading people, and you're going to be led by people. And so I've been a leader in my Air Force career, 4 years, from 3.5 years from the time that I joined. So it does not take long for you to be a leader, but you can also be a leader as a follower, right? When you have the opportunity to um, be in a follower position, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't lead by example. You
Right.
could potentially lead, you know, peer-to-peer leadership, right? And so you depending on how, you know, depending on what role you're in, you may have greater opportunities to lead. You may have fewer opportunities to lead out front, but there are always opportunities to lead no matter what position you're in. So it's a great point.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep. One of the things I think about in talking to friends of mine that were past military officers and different things, um, the subject comes up a lot because it's different than the civilian world. Is you get a lot less say in who you're working for and who you're reporting to, and there's some good and bad with that, from my understanding. And that it's kind of set timeline. It's like, okay, I've got this guy for 6 months or a year, and it'll be somebody else. And I'm sure you've had a ton of experiences with people you really look at as really good leaders, and ones you're like, man, I can't wait for this guy to get reassigned. And so could you touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, so over the course of my military experience, and even before that, right, I think we all experience, and I'll go back to my mission. And we can talk all about kind of how I was raised and all that stuff if you're interested in that. But when I was serving a mission for my church, I had the opportunity, and that's kind of where my leadership started, my overt leadership, right? I think there were times in my life before that where I was a leader in my family in some instances. But on the mission, I remember there was this one, and for those of you who don't know, folks who serve full-time missions for, different religions, but specifically for the Latter-day Saint religion, you serve full-time. So it's a 2-year experience. And I was in Germany, so I had this wonderful experience to be in Germany, and I had somebody that I was, we call them companions, people that you live with full-time, because you guys go out together and you experience the same things, you preach and you do that kind of stuff. And so when I was assigned with this one companion, he was from East Germany, and like I said, I served my mission in Germany, West Germany, so it was a Frankfurt mission. It kind of covered all of the western side of Germany. Um, and so him and his family was raised in more or less the Soviet Union. So East Germany was very much a Soviet bloc, and they lived under that for a long period of time. And so he remembers as a kid, the first time when the wall came down, oh, this is a banana? I've never seen anything like that. He didn't see anything when he first saw a plastic toy. His mind was blown. And so, but he was a
Wow.
very difficult companion. He was a difficult person to be around. But I think that speaks to the fact that maybe I don't want to be like this guy, but I can still love him, right? And I can still learn things from him. So that was kind of that first experience. And then joining the military, I saw a lot more of that because you're exposed to a lot more when you're going through a lot of things together simultaneously in groups of like 60 or more. And when I was assigned to my first base, Kim was pregnant. So we'd gotten married before I ever joined. Kim was pregnant, and I remember my supervisor, he didn't really care he was a single guy, didn't really empathize too much with my situation. And Kim was having some, she was high risk to begin with, but she was having some complications, and she was at the doctor. I was at work, and we had one car. So she dropped me off at work that morning, and then she was off to the doctor to go get everything checked. And then they checked her blood pressure, and they saw that it was like 180 over something, which is insanely high. So they said, you need to go to the hospital right now. You might be having your baby, blah, blah, blah. And, the location that I was stationed at the time, again, F.E. Warren, that nuclear base, yeah, the mission was important, but what I was doing during that period of time was not super critical to that mission. And so when I came up to my supervisor and I said, hey, I need to go to the hospital. My wife could be having a baby. She's high risk. She has all these things. And there were a couple expletives that came out of his mouth. And he's like, I don't really care that your wife's having a baby right now. I'm sorry. He said, I don't really care that your wife is, high risk and having these issues. When that baby comes out, then you can go. And so that was more or less his leadership style, right? I turned to another NCO, non-commissioned officer, who was a leader, not my supervisor, and I said, what do I do about this? Like, my wife could be having a baby today. What can I do? Is there anything I can do? And he just handed me the keys and said, hey, take my truck. I'll deal with him. And so that was two examples of both bad and good leadership, right? And so I had the experience of that in kind of one hit. And the situation similar to that happened throughout the course of my career. We had these ups and downs with good and bad leadership. And I learned something from each of those experiences, from each of those individuals. One was, this is certainly not how you treat people. And then the other one was, this is how you take care of your people so that you can earn that trust and that people are willing to do things for you when the time comes. And so if I ever had to go to war with, either of those supervisors, I can tell you there's a lot more trust with one than the other.
Yeah. Did Kim have her baby that day?
So she didn't have the baby. So I think she wanted to. I think she was ready to be done, but no, she didn't have the baby at that time. She had it probably, I can't remember, a few weeks later, I think. So not too long after, but she was certainly at that point where it could happen.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to reiterate something you said right there at the end for our listeners, and how powerful it can be from, even if what you're going through sucks and you maybe even really dislike somebody, or they're just uncomfortable scenario, there's always something to learn. And sometimes you learn the most through bad examples or bad experiences or uncomfortable. And so I think that's a big thing to point out. So.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Tate. And like I said, those experiences really, and if you've had the fortunate experience to have never had, somebody extremely difficult to work for, and I say privilege, right? Because we do learn from those opportunities.
Mm.
Then you only look at leadership through, I won't say one lens, but fewer lenses and fewer opportunities because you might make decisions in the future that you have a blind side to, right? You don't understand from a different perspective what your leadership style might be doing to somebody else.
Mm.
Yeah, Ryan, for our listener who may not know, I know you and I have talked about this previously, but you're in a leadership role currently. You also speak in the military about leadership. I guess what do you think are the things that helped you, or what are the reasons why you're in that role? And yeah, what have you learned that's put you in that position?
Or even if there's somebody like specifically that just changed that course or really
Yeah.
inspired you.
Um, okay, so this one it's a little bit tough to unpack because I think it's multivariate. It's a multivariate equation, right? So there's multiple things that have led up to this point in my life and kind of my leadership style and perspective. My personal belief is I I like to develop others through self mastery, and so I think it's important to know who you are and be accountable to yourself, so that when you're developing others, you're able to do that to the best of your ability, right? And so having that capability and the determination and the discipline to master yourself is one of the first tenets of leadership, in my opinion. So it just makes it a lot, it rounds you out as a leader and it forces you to think intrinsically, right? To look in the mirror and kind of call yourself to the carpet like, hey, I'm not really good at this thing. What do I do to get better? Or maybe that wasn't a good decision that I made, and actually having that conversation with the people that you lead. Um, but a lot of that has to do with my upbringing, back to your question, and my personal leadership philosophy. And so I grew up kind of on a farm in Arizona. My parents are beekeepers. And when I was 6 years old, we moved out from the city to kind of the dusty part of Phoenix, right? So I was outskirts of Phoenix, grew up in Phoenix, and then actually I was born in Phoenix, and then when I was about 6 years old, we moved to kind of a dusty part of town that was out in the fields, the farms, and the I'd say the good part of Arizona, personally. And we ended up, they started growing their business, but there were a lot of headwinds that came with that. We grew up in very modest circumstances, and my formative years were marked with quite a few financial struggles. Because I was kind of in a school district where, it was shared with the city. So you got the city kids, and then you got the farm kids. So you got ranchers and dairy farmers and things like that. And my parents were beekeepers. So I fit in more with those kids than I did with the city kids because, I mean, I didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so, uh, kind of navigating some of those challenges. And so when I was about 9 years old, that's when my parents started putting me in the bees, and they put a bee suit on me. And I can send you guys a picture of it if you want, but I was nine,
Yeah.
we were on the news and all this kind of stuff. Um, but when I was 9 years old, I remember distinctly, and this was the first time that I would really had. My dad was like, "You're getting in the bees. This is your year, coming of age, I guess, for a beekeeper." So, um, my mom was out of town, so he wanted to exploit that opportunity, and so he threw me in a bee suit. I had black Nike shoes on, and bees do not like black, so they it's a threatening color. So if you think about like a bear, for example, any fur bearing animal, it looks threatening to a bee. And so when I was 9 years old, my dad took me out of the bee yard, and he's like, "We're gonna go check out these bees. You're gonna do this and that." And so as soon as I walked by the bees, uh, the mean hadn't been bred out of the bees yet. Bees are just like cattle and anything else. You can breed the mean out of it, and the mean hadn't been bred out of it yet, out of the bees that we had picked up from somebody yet. And so, um, just some really mean bees, and I got stung like 30 something times in the legs because they were going after my shoes. And one fun fact was that I was actually allergic to the bees, and so that was the first time that I didn't have an allergic reaction, and going into anaphylactic shock. And so my dad called my mom, "Hey, guess what? I took Ryan out to the bee yard and put him through this, and he didn't have any issues." And so, um, and my mom was, of course, irritated, but she was happy that I didn't have a reaction, and so this was their time to put me into the bees and put me to work. And so, getting into as I got older, I didn't play sports as a kid. I didn't have those opportunities to lead in a team environment. Um, my sport was work, and so my dad, I was trained by my dad. So my dad coached me each and every day. I'd come home from school, put on the bee suit, we're going to work, and part of the job would be, go remove hives from, houses and apartment complexes and things like that. Um, but then, uh, yeah, so I didn't play any sports or anything like that. Just the lack of leadership opportunities kind of uh, put me in a situation where later on in life I just didn't feel confident. So confidence is a huge piece of leadership, in my opinion. And if you don't have that confidence, if you're not able to build that confidence, then it's a little more challenging. But I do have, I guess I've developed that confidence over time that has helped me a lot. Um, and so. Yeah. And when I served a mission, like I said earlier, that was the first opportunity for me to kind of develop some of that leadership. We didn't leave the county when I was a kid, so I'd never explored anything outside of the county in Maricopa, so there was not a whole lot for me to experience or see. I was really, really kind of wet behind the ears, and so serving a mission opened my eyes, gave me an opportunity to meet other people and see that kind of stuff. And then I joined the military, and I really expanded um, kind of my knowledge and experience. Um,
Yeah.
so that kind of developed some of that. But obviously, getting married is a new level of leadership. Having children is a new level of leadership. Um, so it took all of that, and even now, my leadership philosophy is kind of a moving target. I'm always developing it. I'm always revisiting it, um, and I'm always critical on myself. Like, how am I leading my family? How am
Mhm.
I? How am I as a husband? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Uh, all of that stuff. So it's very intense for me, anyways, right? Because I'm always go back to self-awareness and the ability to look intrinsically and into yourself and say, where are you as you measure yourself as a man and a leader in your family, at work, and in all these places?
Yeah, you touched on a couple things that just kind of going into the thought I'm having, and with your family and your kids and your wife, and we truly believe and encourage everybody to just lean into the fact that each one of us in some way is a leader, whether that's to a sibling, to our spouse, to coworkers, friends, whatever it is. And one of the defining moments is when you can start to realize that and realize, like, man, I can have an impact on someone, anyone around me. And whether it's intentional or not, we do. One of the things I kind of want to unpack, though, along with that, is coming from being the grunt of the military to an officer, and how the military prepares you for that. Because I'm sure it's a little unique compared to what a lot of us in either the business or sports or experience. And so, just if you can share a little insight into how that looks. And
Yeah. So, and I would say, no matter how much schooling the military will give you, there's no better school than experience.
Mhm.
And I think that's universally true. No matter where you go or what you do, you can sit through seminars, you can sit through leadership training and all that kind of stuff, but until you're in the trenches doing it, it's really difficult to know exactly what it's like and how you're going to lead and that kind of thing. So, um, but to your question, the Air Force and all branches of the military have a commissioning source. So that commissioning source for through colleges, for example, is ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps. Um, so essentially, these students will go through a couple of years of training during college, and throughout that training, they get like for the Air Force, it's like aerospace. What is it called? Aerospace science, and then they get like military science, and then they get leadership, And so they'll sit through PowerPoints, and the Army does the same, right? So you're going to sit through PowerPoints. This is what a leader is. This is what a leader acts like. Here's a video that shows you what a leader should do. They give you all these scenarios. They throw all that stuff at you. And again, that you do need a foundation. So that is foundational. Um, but as soon as you leave that educational or academic environment, you're expected to lead. So you get the brass on your chest or on your collar, and enlisted folks wear stripes, and officers wear brass, and so the shiny object is how they know from far away, oh, that's an officer, I need to avoid them. But so as soon as you commission, you get that brass, and the expectation is that you have the foundations to lead, and now it's really on you and on your mentors, right? Because um, everybody should have a mentor, and whether or not you want to believe it, um, in my opinion, going back to what we discussed earlier, mentors can be people that you don't want to follow, that you don't want to be like. Um, and they can also be people that you do want to be like, and you don't necessarily need to follow them around and emulate their day in and day out to be a good leader. Um, your mentor could be somebody that you admire and watch on TV, right? Some people call them heroes. It could be somebody
Mm-hmm.
that you admire, that you really truly want to be like. And so in the military, I've had bosses and things like that, people that I've worked for, great privileges of working for wonderful people. Right now, I have an amazing boss. She gives me the ability to kind of do what I need to do. And as I do that, it allows me to stretch a little bit and test out new waters, because, as you kind of develop your leadership style, you want to stretch a little bit and push yourself to some new boundaries, so that you can
Mm-hmm.
get a feel for what it is that works and what doesn't work for your leadership style. So, but yeah, so the Air Force really, it's all there's a formula. Follow this formula, and you're a leader. But then there's experience, and the experience is what truly will determine whether or not you're going to be quote unquote a good leader. But there is a concept that I've learned in church, but also you can apply to everything else, especially in leadership, and that's this idea of unrighteous dominion, right? When you're a leader, you have the expectation that you're going to take care of the people under you. And when you have 328 souls, and I remember when I was a brand new airman, I'm sorry, brand new staff sergeant, which is an E5. That's like the first time you're a leader in the Air Force. I'll go back to that. So as a brand new leader in the Air Force, I just graduated the Airman Leadership School is what they call it. When you go from E4 to E5, and you start taking care of other people beyond yourself. So I got, I think, 3 or 4 people that worked for me, and I had one guy. He came to me, and he was wanting to cross train. He was wanting to go into a different career field, and in order for him to have done that, they had to do a hearing test and some other tests on him, just to make sure he was qualified for the job that he wanted. Well, he got the hearing test, and they said, something's wrong with your hearing. Like, were you a drummer as a teenager? He's like, yeah, I did some drumming. And they're like, we want to investigate it a little bit more, just kind of see what's going on. And as they kind of did some digging, he came to me before he even had the MRI scan. But he was like, hey, I think something's wrong. Like, they're gonna find something. They're gonna find a tumor. And I'm like, just calm down. Go get the MRI, and you're gonna be okay. Nothing's gonna be wrong with you. And so I thought he was, uh, being a little nervous about everything, which he was. And so he came back, and he had the MRI, and he's like, hey, can I talk to you real quick? And I said, sure. And so he showed me the MRI scans, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. And he's like, that's a tumor in my brain, and I don't know, something just fell. Sorry about that. So he said that that's a tumor in my brain, and I don't know what to do next. And navigating the emotions and the resilience that has to come from that situation was a unique experience. So he came to me and kind of informed me that he had this brain tumor, and kind of working through that and navigating through the emotions of that situation and the challenges that came with that, the emotional baggage, the massive concern for life was a big concern for him. And then that was a unique experience, and a very big challenge that we had to do. But ultimately, I reached out to a few hospitals that, um, might take him. And then ultimately he decided to go back home to Ohio and get the tumor removed, and he survived it. And he's still in the Air Force today, and he's doing great things, and he's a leader. So it was kind of great to see that evolution. A wonderful experience, for my learning, right? Not a wonderful experience for him to go through, but a great leadership opportunity for me, and I learned a lot in that experience as well. Very humbling. And then, um, there was another experience just a few years later when I was in Florida. I had a subordinate that was setting up for an exercise, and we worked with high voltage electricity. And this individual was, he was kind of kneeling down trying to plug something in. It was a 400 amp cable, which is about that big, and we had about 15,000 volts going through that cable. And as he's going to plug it in, there was an issue with how the wiring was, and it ended up blowing up in his face. And there was another guy with him. So as that arc flash kind of, uh, blew up, it blew their DNA across kind of the camp, and blew one of the guys out of his shoes. I will say both of them survived, so I'll kind of lead with that. Both of them survived, but the guy that worked for me, he called me on the phone frantic. He's like, "Hey, uh, the we'll call him Joe." He's like, "Hey, Joe was injured severely, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Where's he at?" Um, and I said, "Where are you at? What's going on?" Because I was at a different location of the camp, setting something else up. And as he called me, I was concerned for him too. I was like, "What's going on? Where are you at?" And he said, "Oh, I'm injured too." And I'm like, "All right, I'll be there in like 2 seconds. Let me jump in a truck and I'll come over to you." So I jumped in a truck, came over, and it turns out, so his leg was severely burned, third-degree burns, all up and down his leg. His face was burned, parts of his arms were burned, tons of nerve damage throughout his body, and navigating through that, right? That was a life, limb, and eyesight kind of situation where you have to be ready for anything. You just never know what's going to happen. Those kinds of things happen, and you don't have to be in the military for those things to happen. Traumatic events can happen at any time, and being a leader is truly about, um, helping folks know how to navigate through those situations and how to, work through some of those emotions. And this was a months long process afterwards. He had to have skin grafts, he had to have therapy,
Mm.
and the other individual involved, he didn't work directly for me, but I worked with him on a daily basis. And he was an African American guy. His skin was white after that. Parts of his fingers were actually melted. And so he had some serious, trauma from that event. Both of those guys did, and kind of working through that and leading through that was a unique situation. So,
Yeah.
um,
Ryan, I think I think you gave us a clue in something you said earlier too. You um, talked about being a leader for yourself almost has to happen first. How maybe if we have a listener that's, I want to be a leader or I need to work on myself, like where do you start? Because it almost seems like, hey, you have to have that figured out so you can show up powerfully in those moments. At least that's kind of what I'm getting from what you're talking about today. And so I guess like what would be the advice you'd give to somebody to, hey, this is how you create the resiliency. This is how you become a leader to yourself first so that you're able in these moments to be a leader for somebody else when something hard happens.
Something that I've always done, and this is not an easy thing to do. I think you need to thrive on feedback. If you're not willing to not only give but also receive feedback that's honest, you don't know where you stand, and you don't know kind of what you need to work on. And that's what self mastery is all about, just knowing where you're at so that you can eventually get to where you want to go. And that evaluation comes from feedback from others, knowing, you know, where others see you and how they see you and through what lens kind of elucidates or pulls the curtain back on, hey, this is kind of how I am, and these are the things that I need to work on so that at some point you can attack those things and become the man or woman or leader, that you absolutely need to be in those situations. because you never know when you're going to be in a situation where it's calling for your leadership. You may be on on the freeway, and there's a car wreck that happens right next to you, and you have to make a decision right now. Uh, or if there's something in your family that's going on, if there's a child who's going through depression, how do you lead through that? If you have a family member who passed away, how do you how do you help yourself? How do you put your own oxygen mask on so that you can help others as well?
It's awesome. So good. um, I guess as we get close to wrapping up, Ryan, like how do you want to be remembered as a leader to those in your stewardship, whether that's military, family, church?
Yeah, this is always a hard question. Um, but for me, I always kind of think of it like, and this might sound grim for some, but not for me. If I was at my own funeral and I was looking into the casket, how would I be remembered? How would I think of myself? And how do I think others would think of me? And I really want to be a leader, be remembered as a leader who balanced strength with compassion. Um, and decisiveness is a big part of that. Being able to make decisions in critical times and at critical junctions throughout your life is super important. And I will say something that has helped me along this entire journey, right? From the moment I met her was my wife. Kim has always been there along my side. And so having a companion, having somebody to kind of check you when you need to be checked will help you get to that point. So I think she's helped me get to. I'm still working on it, obviously, right? But I do want to be remembered as somebody who has balanced strength with compassion and been able to, you know, find resolution when faced with challenges. And Kim has helped me do that. She's constantly uh, right by my side. She's my sounding board, and I think you got to have that. Whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, doesn't matter. You got to have somebody there to bounce ideas off of, get feedback from, and kind of keep you grounded so that you can achieve the goals that you want. And Kim has certainly done that. And this journey continues forward, and I'm going to keep striving in my leadership to be present and to show up and do the things that I need to do um, so that I can be a leader within my realm, in my scope.
Love that. Yeah, and we think about it sometimes. Like I've been reading through Proverbs, and I can't quote it word for word, but one of the last chapters I read was focused on good counsel and how surrounding yourself with good counsel and how that'll be blessed. And you know, just to point it out, anybody can be counsel. Your wife can be counsel, like good partners, and don't be hesitant. You don't have to figure it all out yourself. I mean,
You could
that's
also
what good
label that
people are
as
for.
good leaders. Surround
Yeah,
yourself with other good leaders, whether
yeah.
that's your spouse or a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was told a long time ago, you're the average of the five people you surround yourself by, and so
Mm-hmm.
finding good people to surround yourself with is critical. And I tell that to my daughter all the time because we're having those conversations right now where she finds herself dealing with friends, like close friends that are really going through some things because of the choices that they have chosen to make. And I just tell her those are opportunities to learn and grow. And if we surround ourselves with good leaders, we ourselves become good leaders. Man, there is a really good statistic, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but I think it was something like if you're just within 25 feet of somebody who achieves greatness, you're 50% more likely to become great yourself. And so you just have to be within proximity to somebody who's doing amazing things. You don't necessarily need to even be friends with them, although that is better because then you can kind of ask them questions and figure things out. But if you find yourself in a situation where you can just be within close proximity to good leadership, that really does make all the difference.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, so many good things for our listener today. Appreciate all this, Ryan. I mean, being a leader to yourself, surrounding yourself with good people, a lot of great lessons. Maybe one last question as we wrap up. Any for our listener, outside of maybe getting a mentor like you talked about, any good books or podcasts that have been huge for you that you'd recommend for someone who's looking for some more help?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Drew. So anything by Robert Greene, that's Greene. One of the better books that he has written that I've really found interesting is the 48 Laws of Power. Sounds a little crazy, but honestly, there's a lot of leadership opportunities, or a lot of leadership that you can glean from that book. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. It's a little dry, a little historical, but honestly, that one's a wonderful, wonderful book about leadership, if you can dig into that. And then a podcast that I really enjoy is a podcast from a guy by the name of Craig Rochelle. It's called the Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast. It's really a wonderful podcast about leadership and tactics that Craig Rochelle puts out there. So highly recommend that one.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet.
Hey, any last thoughts?
I love the conversation today, and I can't thank you enough for joining us and our listeners. And yeah, good stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Everyday Leader podcast. Today is the day.
Thanks for joining us on the Everyday Leader podcast. If you're ready to take your leadership journey even further, subscribe to our weekly newsletter for more insights and practical tips. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram to stay a part of our growing community. Just follow the links in the show notes. If this episode impacted you, please help us spread the word and share the link with a friend from wherever you're listening.